Well, I think we can go ahead and get started with this, maybe everybody that we have here. I think we have 3 things on our agenda. I'll go ahead and start. Of course, we're going to talk about StailBot, one of our very favorite things to talk about. So we did go ahead and I opened a PR to add just those few more labels for exclusion for bug, feature, and test failure. And I'll check on that. I actually haven't looked at it today, but I will. And then keeping that open, because we'd actually like to hear from more people, some other ideas. Megan posted some stuff about including and having SailBot look for all labels. That was the needs more info, right? And pending discussion or both, and we wanted to have some feedback on that. And also looking at possible SEP in the future to replace StailBot with GitHub Actions. That'll need a little bit more research on our part for what we do sort of internally, and I'm going to take that up, but we are interested to look at that since it gives us a little bit more granularity, and then wanted to make sure that everybody has a chance to comment and give us some feedback there. We're open to some other ideas, and we want to iterate on this to make it better. We're just starting with these right now. So should we, oh, it looks like we're getting a few more people. I guess I didn't wait long enough.
Yeah, Gareth and I just pinged the community Slack channels, so there might be some more people joining.
Oh, thanks guys. That's a good idea.
Gareth, are you back from letting the dog out, or do you still need to go let the dog out?
No, my dog is out.
Okay.
It's the answer to the age-old question of who let the dogs out. It was me.
Would you like to talk about the CVE release?
Sure. So about a month and a half ago, we got alerted to a CVE or a potential CVE from someone at Apple. So we spent some time investigating that, determined that it was actually a security risk. And so it was a rather simple fix, but the tests involving testing to make sure we don't run into this again were the challenging part. So the gist of what the CVE was, if you happen to have the Salt Net API enabled, as well as Salt SSH enabled, making a call to the Net API and specifying a client of SSH would allow you to run commands against that SSH, that Salt SSH connection, without any sort of authentication. So not passing authentication, not authenticating against the API would allow you to just run commands. Additionally, using the raw shell option, which was enabled by default, would allow you to run like arbitrary commands against the SSH daemon. So one of the proof of concept examples was passing the -O for options, additional Salt SSH options to SSH, and passing the proxy command option, which would allow you to run any commands on the host system where Salt SSH was, where the Net API was running on. And so that would allow you to run any arbitrary commands on your, in most cases, Salt master via the API. So the change we have since locked down. So you do now require authentication when accessing Salt SSH via the Net API, as well as disabling that raw shell command by default. So both of which have to be enabled. And that fix was in the 2018.3.5 as well as 2019.2.3 and will be in the upcoming Neon release.
Yep, we just are working on getting that pull request merged in before tagging the RC. So speaking of the RC, we are looking to hopefully get that tagged tomorrow. So we're just digging through the open pull requests and open issues to make sure we've got all our bases covered. And we'll be merging a few things today and possibly tomorrow morning. And then we'll be putting in RC and getting some RC packages out so that people can start testing. Does anyone have any questions on the RC?
I'm assuming that that's a question. There's a question in the Zoom chat from agent user.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's related to the CVE, not the RC. I believe that is accurate. It does not affect if you're using Tornado API. It would only be the Salt API using like CherryPy or UWGI.
Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, so we've got this time for any, community members to ask questions, provide comments, feedback. So if anyone has anything, just let us know. We'll sit back and be patient while you gather your thoughts.
While we're waiting for questions, do we want to talk about our plans, our strategies around Stalebot?
Again, we can. We went ahead and added a few more labels for exclusion and did a PR for that, separating it out. Megan put a comment in for some includes labels, and we're going to look at using that and see if that will work again for a little bit different granularity going forward. Definitely past the releases that we're looking at soon. We want to look at some other options available and want to have some feedback. This is definitely something we want to iterate on so that we can get what the community really wants and trying to make it better in the interim what we can do today. Definitely not the end all be all, and we're open to feedback and how we can be better there and faster there, and looking towards using the GitHub Actions as a possibility, maybe even opening us up as a change for that. Give us a little bit more granularity, I think, and we'll continue to iterate there. And would love to hear some feedback if people have it.
So I've got something we can discuss. One of the things that has been coming up, and this sort of started actually, I think.
Now he reports to jizzing.
Barry, is it possible that you could mute? Thank you. So this came up because we have been, as most of you know, we've been working on upgrading Tornado, and that work still has a bunch of failing tests that we're trying to address. So it's not going to make it into Neon, unfortunately. Though we do have a plan, which is to include the older Tornado code base. So that'd be like 4.4 4.5.6, I believe. Not 100% on the version, but the latest version that we can support across the board, and include that in the SALT code base. That discussion led us down the path of talking about in sodium potentially using salt bin as our delivery method. So that is something that would be sort of a change in the way we package salt and deploy it. So just opening that up for discussion in case anyone has thoughts or feedback on it.
So this is Tom. I can probably give an overview on that, conceptually at least. So as many of you may be aware, there is a project called Salt Bin and a project called Pop Build. Some of you have heard me rant about POP like a madman. That will continue in general, but POP has a system of building single binaries that works really well with the loader system inside of SALT. And so POP's build system makes it very easy for us to be able to, the intention being that a POP project can be very easily, again, bundled up into a single binary. That build system is what is used by SALT Bin. How it works is that instead of having to install a litany of Python libraries on the system, or even Python on the system, Python itself and the entire Python environment that you wish to make applicable to that specific application are bundled into a single binary. Now, at first glance, that does mean that you would not be able to dynamically update the libraries in that binary, but that can be easily overcome by making sure that our startup sequence on that binary can have explicit access to a directory on the system so that you would be able to pip install any additional libraries. It would also mean that we would be able to build a collection of binaries per platform, and we could do that very easily, that ship with different different dependency sets. So for instance, we could make a salt heavy that would result in potentially like a 400 meg binary, but we have just every possible dependency in it. At the same time, we can make a salt light, which looks like it's about 45 to 50 megs. Or we could make a salt common, which would probably be about 60 to 70 megs, which has most of the common libraries that we'd have in there, like GitFS, for instance, and a few others. If we do that, though, the benefit that we have is, one, the installation of SALT gets significantly easier because all anybody has to do is download this binary and just run it, right? It's as if we had all the benefits of Go, or I should say most of the benefits of Go. And so that's definitely a consideration there. It would also mean that we would be able to ship the version of Python which SALT is running on top of. And we've been strongly considering this, particularly in supporting older platforms, as it becomes increasingly difficult to ensure that we can necessarily have more modern versions of Python that are generally available on systems that need to be supported. When we go back and we look at CentOS 6 and even CentOS 7, and Red Hat 7, of course, variants thereof, it's very difficult for us to be able to, or to need to go out to users and say, hey, if you want to keep managing that system, you're going to have to install a full Python 3 stack. A lot of people don't want to hear that, and understandably. And at the same time, as we're very well aware, it is no longer tenable for us to support both Python 2 and Python 3. So that little monologue hopefully answered some of the baseline questions. One that, yes, it can be made in such a way that you can extend it on disk with more Python libraries, even though it would be shipped in an isolated fashion. Two, that it would ship with its own Python, so it solves that particular problem. Three, it should honestly significantly improve our development and release cycle, because we'll be able to test against a much more static set of dependencies, and it should alleviate all of the problems we run into with SALT's dependency matrix potentially competing with any other application that wishes to use system Python. And then the last thing I'll say as I finish this whole thing is that I'll put a plug-in for Salt Bin. I mean, it does effectively wrap PyInstaller, but that thing is flippin' awesome because Salt Bin actually extends PyInstaller in a few very critical ways, which makes it so that during that build cycle also can natively embed .so files and .dlls. Okay, I'm done. Comments, please. Questions, comments, arguments, and rebuttals.
So in the chat, Alan mentioned that SaltBin looks especially useful for native minions when trying to install across multiple firewall versions of network device hardware, and that hits the nail right on the nose. One of the things that we've been looking at as we've been looking into the native minions and starting to support native minions is using SaltBin for those. And so future, that definitely is the future of native minions, is using SaltBin. So that'll also simplify that whole process, can be similar to our regular release process.
It should also simplify our tests, because at this point, our tests break a lot because of minor dependency changes. But if we can ensure static dependency maps, then that should not only improve tests, but it should also significantly help us in wrangling bugs in general.
Right, so that's where our testing is at right now. Actually, we are currently testing against a static set of dependencies. Now, those dependencies are static per operating system that we support. It's not a globally static list, but each operating system has a static list that we're testing against. So we'll be able to condense that into hopefully a single list that we test against, and it will reduce the, so because right now with the test suite, although it is stable, we have to think that there is a potential right now for there to be a newer library on a system that we haven't added into the static requirements yet. So there could be a potential for a mismatch and a bug to crop up. So that this will resolve that whole issue.
Now, while we've just sung many praises, it is noteworthy that in our current incarnation, the binary version of Salt does take a little longer at initial startup. So initial startup, instead of just having to initialize Python, it has to do a little unpacking as well. And so that can be a little slower. With that said, we have been exploring, and I've actually, I need to write the test for this particular instance, but I have extended pop build to be able to build a not a single binary, but a collection deployment that would that should alleviate that startup time issue. But a few more tests are still needed. But that's the only other concern that I can think of, unless somebody else can remember any others that were that had come up in any previous sidebar conversations that I've had with people.
Yeah, Tom, the only other one that I can think of, which it may be minor, it might be, I don't know, is just the fact that it will be a different way to call Salt from the command line. Instead of having separate salt-master, salt-minion commands, my understanding is that we would have salt space minion and then arguments. Is that correct?
That is correct. I think that the elegant way that we would want to do this is that we would still certainly be planning on deploying packages, right? We would still be building these binaries on their target systems. and deploying them inside of RPMs and debs, etc. It's just that those RPMs and debs would have far fewer files and no dependencies. Inside of those packages, I would say that it would make a lot of sense for us to add to the salt bin repository the ability to have just a bunch of shell scripts that, that just wrap those. And then we can go through the documentation and begin to morph the documentation to say that, hey, you know, post sodium this happened, and all the commands are built into Salt, and these are just convenience scripts.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
Or we could go so far as to putting a little echo, right, in those scripts that just says, hey, this is a convenience script. In the future, we might not ship with these. Get used to just running salt space master, minion, call, etc. But a very solid point that must be addressed.
So, Tom, do you have anything else going on in innovations or anything you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, the main thing here is, does anybody, if anybody doesn't have any objections to the salt bin move right now, I mean, we're not making the decision, of course, and it could justifiably be content for a SEP. But I certainly want people to chew on that. Again, my thinking is that this allows us to deploy Salt like it's a Go binary, which should make our lives a lot easier. Granted, I mean, these binaries are bigger in Go binaries because they've got to ship the Python stack. They're nowhere near as efficient as Go is at bundling only the pieces that are required up, because that's just not how Python's built. But please, we definitely want to hear objections. You can take a look at how these projects function by looking at the pop build system, which is available on PyPy by pip installing pop build. And the repo is also available on SaltStack. And then the salt bin repo, we still need to flesh that out a little bit, but only that the salt bin repo only has the requirements files for a basic build at this point. We need to get some requirements files in there with all the explicit versioning for a few other build scenarios, right? And those scripts I was talking about. But definitely want to get feedback on this this idea. Again, in a nutshell, I mean it would speed us up significantly if we were able to take this approach, because then we'd still have RPMs, we'd still upgrade those RPMs, right? And the upgrade of those RPMs would happily delete the old stuff and rely on that binary and remove the dependency for Python. Sorry.
Oh, I was just agreeing, Tom.
Okay. The Sage asked if I want to talk about any innovation project stuff. As many of you are aware, we've got POP, and I've been a little stalled lately. We've had a lot more energy going directly into releases, but looking at garnering a little more direct work on some of those projects. In particular, we really need to get more awareness around Heist, I would argue. And the other thing is that Heist will work perfectly well with these binaries, because I think a lot of people probably don't realize how incredibly simple using Heist can make their lives. And we really would like some more people using Heist so that we could give it a little more refinement. Okay, that's all I've got.
Thanks, Tom. We'll open it back up to the community if you guys have questions or feedback or anything that you want to discuss. We're happy to open that up and hear from you. So in the chat from Agent User, we have a question: how is Heist meant to interact with long-running systems that reboot, etc.?
So that's a good point. And really what I need to add to Heist is to be able to manage that in a really smooth way. If you've got a long-running system that reboots, then Heist should be able to auto-detect that SSH connection has gone down, and then passively ping the system until it comes back up. And then upon that system coming back up, reinitialize the daemon. Now, with that said, Heist also does have the ability to have that daemon get started and managed from system D, which means that a system reboot can still run that daemon. And again, with that said, if we're taking that approach, it would make sense. And one of the things that we need to get added to Heist is the ability to do a detached cleanup. So right now, Heist cleans up on shutdown, but it would be really great and simple, really, to add to Heist the ability to say, let's hit this target of systems and make sure that all current instances of Heist are not present on them. So that's something that is an excellent point, and something that open up an issue if there's one already, and we'll get that on the list.
Good question. Is there a plan for Windows? If I recall, they added SSHD via some Linux subsystem.
Yes. So we're still running into a few hiccups with pup build, and frankly, all of our single binary build efforts on Windows. This is something that we would plan to have resolved preparatory to a Sodium rollout. So the only real challenge that I feel like we're running into right now is making sure that single binary is nice and smooth on Windows. And then with that, we would probably be looking at SSH for the Windows connection. It's just so much more featureful than anything else. So yeah, and yes, OpenSSH, my understanding is they made it fully native. I don't think it requires a Linux subsystem. But I'd need to double check. As is well known, Windows is not my forte. But yeah, that's one of those things that we want to make sure that we've got in there, so that it is a seamless experience via Salt operation between Windows and Linux.
Yeah, and actually those OpenSSH binaries don't even require this Linux subsystem these days. They're shipping native OpenSSH on Windows.
Yeah, great questions. We need more about Heist.
Yeah, we just need to get a little more momentum there. The capabilities inside of Heist are kind of ridiculous, especially, I mean, it's not that big. Yeah, what you can do with that thing is phenomenal. And these questions are right. I don't think there's a whole lot of holes that we need to fill here. The other thing is that, again, Heist isn't built to just work with Salt. It should be extensible to be able to work with virtually any binary that can be shipped in an efficient way.
Yeah, have you seen some other examples of how people may be using it or could be used?
Sorry, have I?
Yeah, just wondering.
I mean, primarily in its base use case at this point, and we've only got a few users. Yeah, but I mean, to be honest, if we look at things from a roadmap perspective, as we're rolling out Neon, assuming that we go with a binary deployment, it would make a ton of sense for us to start pushing Heist really hard for the sodium release and forward. It's far faster, far more efficient than Salt SSH. It doesn't compromise any features like Salt SSH does, and really should be getting looked at as a Salt SSH replacement. We just need to make sure that the use cases which arise because of its differences are alleviated. Again, I think it would be optimal if we could migrate away from Salt SSH and towards Heist, assuming that that pans out to be something which is plausible. Because again, it's a lot easier to maintain. We take Salt SSH out of Salt, so it doesn't have to be part of that code base which is being tested, and we can make Salt more focused on its core intentions. Is there any way to configure OpenSSHD to allow only a safe, trusted input rather than a root key across the fleet? There definitely is. And so a Heist can, of course, one, if you want to connect not as root, which is the optimal way of doing it, Heist can execute the transport binary via sudo. Setting up sudo so that the sudo is only able to operate from a specific user to activate Salt would be a truly optimal scenario from a host security perspective. From a authentication and access perspective, there are, of course, SSH certificates, and Heist utilizes a fantastic library called Async SSH, which supports, to my knowledge, all of the major authentication mechanisms which are available to SSH. So you actually end up with quite a few options there. And the SSH team has done an excellent job of keeping up with security, especially in light of some heavy criticism that came only a few years ago from ironically, the creator of SSH, who was explaining to people that keys are not good or not good enough. So ironically, it was an argument I used a long time ago against, let's just say, other implementations of system management over SSH, that the creator of SSH had come out and said, doing system management over SSH and using the authentication mechanisms in place is dumb and bad. Nobody listened to him, though. I would argue they should have, but nobody did. Can't win them all. Well, an agent user, I'm glad that answers your question, but we should make sure, and I should go back to the Heist documentation, to have these cases of, here are the ways in which you can set up SSH connections in a secure, maintainable way as to alleviate these problems in a bigger scope. A lot of people are justifiably not really aware of the intricacies of SSH. Not something you expect to, not something you usually talk about over breakfast.
No, thank you for that. I think that was a really good question, and also pretty interesting. I just want to let everybody know that we're still here. We can open it back up to more feedback, more questions. Anybody has anything?
Yeah, I would just like to point out that we're just seeding the conversation here. And so, we'll bring this up again in the open hours and start discussing it on the community Slack channels and everything, so that we have a broader discussion about all this.
And also, just to reemphasize, you don't have to put your questions in the chat. You can actually speak if you're so inclined.
In fact, we encourage that.
Yes, the the use of audio is not limited to people from SaltStack.
Are you opposed to, I think you mentioned this, but I didn't quite catch it. Are you opposed to allowing people to be able to package whatever they want into Salt Bin? So that way, when they deliver a minion, it may have all the required libraries that also the minion may be going to be managing on that system?
And not only are we not opposed to it, we would strongly encourage it. And the Salt Bin project is explicitly set up to allow you to do that, so that it's really easy for you to look at Salt Bin and see that, oh, all you've got to do is make your own requirements file or your own pop build configuration, run pop build, and everything will build up nicely according to whatever you need. I mean, and I'll also add that pop build allows you to explicitly define the version of Python that you want to build against. So you can go so far as to say, hey, I'm running a CentOS whatever, and I want to build against Python 3.6 or 3.7, so that it's exactly how you want that system to be packaged. So yeah, we want to do the best of both worlds in this scenario. That, again, really to follow Salt philosophy, to give you something out the gate that works and is simple and is easy and is usable, while at the same time affording the user every layer of flexibility which we can.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you for the question. And for allowing us to hear your voice.
Yeah, we hope that this will encourage more people to attend and also speak up. We want to hear from you guys. We want to get to know you. We want to hear your voices. I mean, I'm sharing my library. You know, you can see my library. Please share yours.
Like showing off, Sage.
Well, it gave us something to talk about instead of having silence, so I thought it was okay.
It's
You guys
Just point
can
out
see
again too that
optional
that's
library.
Sage's backup library, another primary library.
Right, it's my backup library. The main one's upstairs. And you can see that I kind of revel in my geek culture. Now, we hope that these hours of open discussion can be good and healthy and also fun. We hope that we can keep them going in that direction and encourage it. So,
I have another question that's a bit more to do with one of the working groups, but I assume would require SaltStack's approval. With the testing team that is trying to create a more comprehensive test suite, right, for all of Salt, I was wondering if they have any kind of plans in the works for showing that how much of Salt is covered or what tests are covering it. The best that I can show as an example, I'll put here in the chat. There's a term for it, but it's escaping me right now. But like this link that I'm sharing, it highlights exactly what lines a test suite are touching, and it shows what lines in red are not being touched by a test. Are we planning on doing anything like that so that people can understand that, yes, it's looking at the code, but not necessarily testing every function?
Yeah, so
You're talking about code coverage, right?
Yeah,
Yes, thank you. Yes.
yeah, so right now we're using codecov.io, and we have discussed moving away from that. And well, actually, wait, this link is codecov.io.
Yeah,
that's the Lector project, not SaltStack.
Yeah, is that available to the public? Because we were looking for something like that and we didn't find that.
So right now, we're sort of in flux with CodeCov.io. We don't actually have it enabled on new pull requests that are happening right now. The reason for that being with the amount of pull requests that we have and the amount of tests that we were running, we started to overload CodeCov.io. So they are currently working on a release that will resolve those issues on their side so that we can start using it again. And so when that happens, we'll have to look and make sure that we have this functionality enabled and available. We've also discussed potentially using just Jenkins and coverage.py and having it generate its HTML reports. That's just a discussion that Pedro and I have had, and so we haven't actually discussed that with the larger group or our site reliability engineers, because I'm sure that would affect Jenkins usage. So those are just some of the things I know about. But thanks for pointing out that you couldn't find that. We'll definitely look into that when we get CodeCov enabled again.
Awesome. Thanks for the link and for the explanation.
Yeah, another question in the chat. Does it work with integration tests across Kitchen? I assume this is Kitchen Salt. If
It should work. I don't know that it combines them. We would probably have to look at the individual builds to see. I'm not really sure how all that works. That's something we'd have to investigate. Unfortunately, Pedro's not on the call, and he probably knows the most about that right now and how that's all working.
Yeah, I would say in a nutshell that the testing working group and particularly Pedro will be able to answer these in much more detail than us. But Agent User does have a solid point in that different integration tests and different platforms and different Kitchen instances are explicitly testing different components of the code.
Yeah, I want to say that it combines all the results, but I'm not actually sure on that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm happy to take it back to that working group and to Pedro, who's on our side, that we interact with him every day, and make sure that gets answered and gets put back out into the community. I'll follow up there.
Perfect. So we've got about 8 minutes left. If anyone else has anything.
Just poking around a little bit at CodeCov, it does look like it aggregates the outputs from the build. At least if you go look at one of the build reports, it'll actually has like an uploads thing, and it looks like all of the different Jenkins build, like macOS X Mojave Pi2 run test 0MQ and Ubuntu 16.04 Pi2 run test 0MQ Salt. Like all those different builds from Jenkins appear to be uploading reports, coverage reports to CodeCov. So I'm assuming they're aggregating them across the builds. I can go post a link in Slack for the thing that I'm looking at, so other people are interested in that, or not Slack, over here in the chat.
That's good. This one. I'll ask one more time. Do we have any other questions? Feedback, concerns, jokes? If not, we can give you guys back some time in your day. We're happy to do
I
that.
got a joke.
You got a joke?
Yep.
Go, Daniel.
Did you hear about the snail that robbed the clock store?
No.
He took a lot of time.
You already have dad jokes. I get crickets on that.
I would question why that has to be a snail joke.
I have exclusively snail jokes. That's my thing.
I'm not sure that's a valid reason for it being a snail joke.
I don't know. Seems legit to me. I think the snail makes it a funnier joke.
You hear the one about the snail that bought a Tesla Model S?
Is this going to be about
He
escargot?
likes people to say, look at that escargot.
And with that, anybody else have a joke? Not related to snails.
Okay.
He wants to keep his day job.
So there are
Okay.
2 talking muffins
Until
in an oven.
until next time, everybody.
Wait, I want to hear Alan's joke.
Yeah, go, Alan.
Said he has a joke. Okay.
So there are 2 talking muffins in an oven. One looks at the other and says, "Man, it's hot in here." And the other one goes, "Oh my gosh, a talking muffin."
What did the one wall say to the other wall? I'll meet you in the corner.
Oh, what a good way to end the meeting. I'm going to say thank you to all of the jokes, for all the questions, for all the comments. Thank you all for attending. This has been a fantastic meeting. Happy Thursday.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.